Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So if you are a conservative, you may be really frustrated looking at the world around us and seeing all of the issues that are plaguing America and Western society as a whole. And it seems like the leftist Marxists continue to win. And headed into 2024, that becomes a very frustrating proposition. Why weren't Republicans and conservatives more prepared for the overturning of Roe versus Wade and pushing this back on the states? Why weren't we prepared to have a Republican majority back in the House? Why haven't we been prepared for all of these issues that are confronting our society? But we have to go back and look at the framework that is bigger than politics. It comes back to fundamental ideology. And when we look at how the left has systematically undermined conservative thought and Western culture that gives the greatest chance for human flourishing, then we start to understand not just where we are at and where we are headed, but where we have been. And Paul Harvey in 1965 was so prescient that he gave a warning suggesting if he were the devil, then he might just continue on pushing this ideology and confronting Americans with these lies that we so easily buy into that ultimately shapes not just our culture, but then our politics and our worldview. Listen to this from 1965. I mean, this was 60 years ago, and consider how much further we are toward the destruction of Western civilization.
If I were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.
Paul Harvey. Good day.
Don't we miss Paul Harvey and Rush Limbaugh and a lot of these other greats who were very prescient? And where we are at now, 60 years after this first aired, is seeing the consequences of that worldview. This doesn't just come down to Republican votes versus Democrat votes, but this comes down to the root worldview of what do we believe makes a well-ordered society? What do we believe makes America great? If we are going to sacrifice the definition of marriage, the definition of family, the definition of patriotism, the definition of life, the definition of what it means to be a conservative and advocate for a moral worldview, or even that there is morality and there is objective truth, then we've lost the game and the debate before we're even on the playing field. See, this is what the left has done so well, is that they have come in and said, your truth versus my truth is all up for debate. So we are going into the political game on a relativistic worldview, that there's not just one objective moral framework that all society must adhere to. That's the beauty of America. America stood for something. America stood for the proposition that our rights are pre-political. They come from God, our creator. The sole purpose of government is to preserve and protect those rights that are non-negotiable. How we protect them, when and where we protect them, those are debates that we can have. But the debate should not be whether or not we have those rights. The question should just be, what limited powers should government possess? So if we want to actually win, it's not just a matter of having more Republicans registered or saying Trump versus Biden or having any of these red versus blue debates. We have to go back to the fundamental root ideology. As Francis Schaeffer, who is a Christian apologist back in the 70s, wrote in the book, How Should We Then Live? He pointed out again very precisely that if you don't have a Christian worldview, then you have something else that is going to end in confusion, just man's collective judgment. We don't have a social contract here in America. We have a moral document and a framework that we must continue to advance. So if you are a conservative that doesn't believe in all this, then you don't really understand what makes America great. And if you are a conservative that does want America to be great, we have to go back to a moral founding and reclaim the definition of what it means to be a moral and upright society. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Throughout history, there are clear moments that define our nation's path, and now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1 ounce 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at newtgingrichsilvercoin.com. That's newtgingrichsilvercoin.com and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to newtgingrichsilvercoin.com now. Well, it is Thursday, so you know what time that is. It is time for Thursday's Roundup with our Power Panel. And this week's Power Panel includes the great Robin Biro, who is a Democrat strategist, and Matt Tyrmand, who is a Claremont Institute fellow, and John Cardillo, who's former NYPD and a GOP strategist. And before we get to today's headline, Matt, I gotta just call you out on the hat. I know we talked about this in the break before air, but everybody watching, does that not look like the trans flag? I mean, we have been joking to Matt about this for a long time, and he's wearing it yet again today. So that's not the American flag.
I stand with the flag because I'm a Claremont Lincoln fellow. And if you're taking John Cardillo's material, you're already losing. So.
He wears it alone in the car with me, Jenna. It's creepy. It's just
I'm
creepy.
so sorry.
Yeah, that's the creepiest thing that goes on in with you, John. Right.
Well, next time we'll introduce you as the LGBTQ lobbyist and, the trans activist and all of that. So, I'm really interested in your thoughts on all this, Matt, but we got to chide you for this, because when you wore that the first time, to everybody watching, I was like, what is that? The trans flag? And he thinks it's an American flag, but there's just no way you get there because the stripes are supposed to go underneath the stars. Yes.
Claremont about their logoing. I personally love this flag and this hat, and anybody who sees it knows that I am an American patriot. And I'll leave
I love the actual American flag. That's not the American flag. But let's get to today's first top headline. This coming Newsweek.
Really hard-hitting segment.
Yes, right. This one, Joe Biden is now beating Donald Trump in the majority of polls. And going further into this article, there were several that showed a spread of anywhere between 2 and 5 points. And John, since you are not wearing the trans flag, we'll start with you because you probably have some good commentary on this. I thought that we were reliably informed that this wasn't going to happen if Donald Trump was the nominee. And yet here we are.
Yeah, well, no matter what we say, you know that you, Matt, and I, Jen, are going to be beat up as rhino cucks who believe Newsweek and are talking about Newsweek. So, but that being said, I don't know how much stock I put in these because they're all popular vote polls. And the ones that are going to really matter are those critical swing states. All of these are relatively small samples. As I read through the article, 500 and something, 800 and something registered voters. We don't even see the breakdown, RD independent. We don't know if the samples had integrity. But again, these seem like a general across the board sampling and not those swing state samples. So again, not unpredictable. I think this race is going to be, razor thin down to the wire. I think everybody would agree with that, no matter where they stand. But I don't know how much stock I put in these because of their generality.
Yeah. So, Robin, does he have a point? Because, I think that everybody's just really tired of the polls as self-fulfilling prophecies. But Donald Trump is a fan of the polls when they show him up. And then suddenly, we're all just, the losers that believe Newsweek, and we're believing the Democrat strategy when, there's headlines like this that come out. So does this actually inform voters of anything?
I've been reluctant and so skeptical of these polls ever since 2016, when I was draped actually from head to toe in Hillary gear.
Oh no, that's actually worse than the trans flag, I think, right? Okay, Matt, you're off the hook now.
But they've been getting it wrong ever since then. So poll schmoles, but. I've got to say, Jenna, your lead to the segment is so true. I've been saying, I was warning my Republican friends, look, you may love Donald Trump in the primary. He's going to clobber everybody else. But in the general election, you're going to have a different candidate than Donald Trump if you want to beat Joe Biden, an incumbent. He's not a very popular incumbent by any means right now, but he has the power of the incumbency. And I think that they needed another candidate, a DeSantis or a Nikki Haley, somebody that could have attracted some crossover appeal, because at the end of the day, it is about those few swing states. Donald Trump won or lost in 2020 because of 43,000 votes in three swing states. And I don't think that he's built his coalition anymore since then. But a different candidate, Ron DeSantis or a Nikki Haley, could have pulled some of those voters. I would have been possibly swayed. My vote may have been swayed as well, but not for Donald Trump.
Wow. Well, Matt, you and the former Hillary supporter have a lot in common here, because actually all of us do, because we were fans of Ron DeSantis. So what do you make of the polls and where we sit right now headed into 2024, since these headlines were so predictable?
Polling is not an accurate science by any means. It has gotten less and less so every cycle, but especially the last two cycles, starting with the Trump and MAGA effect in 15, 16. There's always been some level of Tory effect in the mass media age where people don't want to honestly tell pollsters, knowing that most pollsters are attached to media platforms and swing a certain way. So they don't give an honest feedback. It has gotten even worse. I have friends who are pollsters. I've spoken to them. To get a sample, they now have to go out and find respondents on a factor of 10x to what they normally did to get people to actually answer questions in the first place. Where in the past, to get 500 to 800 people, you'd have to make 2,000 to 3,000 or 4,000 calls. That's now 3, 5, 7x, especially when you have Trump on top of ticket. People do not want to go out on a limb and say anything because of the negative effects that could blow back on them for doing so. They just say, why bother? So who does answer polls? Who are the respondents? The highly polarized factions of either side who are really motivated. So you have an embedded effect that's pro-Trump that I think is probably overestimating his general election support, because it's Trump primary voters who are willing to say, okay, I'm voting for Donald Trump. So I actually think the polling skew is much more antithetical to where historically the Tory bias was, which was it worked against the right and for the left. I think this time it is much more going to be a headwind to reality for Trump, that the real amount of general election support is going to be even more Biden and independent and a vote against Trump.
Wow. That's really sad and unfortunately probably predictable. I mean, I know whenever I get something that comes up on my phone as political call, I just send it to voicemail and spam because I don't want to talk to those people. And I think that you're right, that, the regular people don't really want to do that. It's only going to be the people who have really strong opinions. And we don't really see Trump, I think, or Biden actually bringing anybody into their own fold. But gentlemen, we'll be back with another top headline for Thursday's roundup. And I appreciate so much all of you coming on, and even Matt, because we get to teach you, but it's all among friends, and really appreciate it. So we'll be right back with more on Thursday's roundup with the top trending headlines and our great power panel with all of their very smart takes right after this. Well, friends, you might have heard that Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way that they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, so they want to pass along the savings directly to you by having a $25 extravaganza. I love that word, extravaganza. When Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company. With the help of his dedicated employees, they now have hundreds of products, some you may not even know about. To get the word out, I want to invite my listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows are just $25. MyPillow sandals, also awesome, only $25. Their 6-pack towel sets are $25. And brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, just $25. For the first time ever, the premium MyPillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. And orders over $75 will receive free shipping too. This amazing offer won't last long. Go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna, or call 800-564-8475 today. That's 800-564-8475, or go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Jenna. All right, continuing our Thursday roundup of the week's top trending headlines with our power panel. And this week we are joined by very dear friends, Robin Biro, Matt Tyrmand, and John Cardillo. We all have in common that we get so much hate on Twitter for our wonderful opinions. So I appreciate you guys joining. This coming from Bloomberg: the U.S. sees imminent missile strike on Israel by Iran and proxies. Iran proxies may strike Israeli military government sites. The attack would mark a major widening of conflict in the Middle East. And Matt, this coming, of course, as Joe Biden is still criticizing Israel and Netanyahu and has very weak foreign policy. So where do you see this positioning of Iran, Israel, and how the U.S. factors into this?
So certainly power abhors a vacuum. Everything we've seen the last 3+ years under the Biden foreign policy regime has been a weakening of America, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Venezuela taking over their neighbor Guyana, of course, what we've seen in Ukraine under Putin's invasion, and then the Middle East as well has been a tinderbox that was under control based on a strong foreign policy. And with power abhorring a vacuum, this is what we have. Look, Israel, and I just got back from Israel a couple months ago, Israel is going to do what it's going to do. It has a united front within its domestic policy and political regimen, which is not always the case. Israel is usually very fragmented parliamentary democracy. They are not looking for any sanction and mandate from foreign leaders, especially knowing Joe Biden is cowing to, the Michigan Arab radical cohort to try and swing Michigan. It's domestic politics. Chuck Schumer, we saw his statement, and then Mike Johnson came in and gave a full-throated evangelical Republican view of Israel's importance to stand with Israel. If Iran does something, and Israel did preemptively attack Iranian proxies in Lebanon and Syria as of late, this is obviously going to escalate. I don't know if Iran is going to act as concertedly as is being suggested by the foreign policy press. Marco Rubio said it's going to be like 1973, which was the last really heavily conflagration in the region. That's 50 years. But Israel is going to defend itself. And, the American Republicans, by and large, with the exception of certain MAGA, Clown Caucus members, are standing with Israel. And I think funding will continue to go their way for weaponry so they can defend themselves. But it is certainly escalating, no doubt about it.
Robin, how do you see this? And do the Democrats care about Biden's foreign policy overall, or is he playing just to a specific demographic, hoping to bring a few people in? This doesn't really make sense, of course, from a rational foreign policy perspective. So, how do you see this?
It really doesn't make sense, Jenna. And my problem with Joe Biden is that he always wants to please everybody, and by doing so, that's not good leadership. He's sending over General Kurilla right now to go and meet with the Israeli defense minister. I'm skeptical. I mean, we need something better, more concrete than that. I will say, though, that having, being a veteran myself, a Spec Ops veteran, we're not going to be privy to everything that's going on behind the scenes. We know that. But so far, what the public is seeing on this, I'm really not satisfied with, Jenna.
Yeah, and John, speaking of what the public is seeing, I mean, that was a very weird Tucker Carlson interview with that, pastor who's talking about what's going on in Bethlehem, and was very uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of people. I mean, even when you have people who are, really, really hardcore MAGA, I would call them cultists that are calling out Tucker Carlson. Even on the right, it seems like we can't get it together for support of Israel and actually a coherent foreign policy on this. So, if we can't even get it together other than Mike Johnson, how are we supposed to call out Biden and say, this is what the foreign policy should be?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think Tucker's interview was dishonest, right? Bethlehem is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, which is Hamas. They're inextricably linked. I've said this time and again on air. There is no daylight between the Palestinian people, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. And so the logical step from there is the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. One thing Donald Trump did very right. He made IRGC chief the most dangerous job in the world. If you popped your head up outside of Iran as an IRGC chief or senior leader, you got killed. Our operators went in, or our drone operators went in, and you were killed. And that's the way it should be. You've got the Houthis, you've got Hezbollah, you've got Hamas. They have always been Iran proxies funded by and managed by the IRGC, funded by the Obama administration. All those billions they gave back to Iran. So I most definitely believe, watching Biden's incredibly weak, feckless, spineless posture on this issue, if I'm Iran, if I'm the IRGC, why wouldn't I have my proxies hit Israel and hit them savagely? Who's going to do anything about it? Biden's going to give me more money. He's going to kowtow, and he's going to tell Israel to stand down. I think the world is in a very dangerous place because of Biden, and I think Iran, and with their allies, China and Russia, but Iran driving this because they have control over that region, Iran is going to amp this up and absolutely use their proxies to strike Israel harder.
And Matt, to John's point, Donald Trump was very strong on pro-Israel policy and really did a lot in his administration. And yet he doesn't seem to be very interested in speaking out on this issue and making this a huge contrast that would be favorable to him, unlike, some of the other rhetoric that we've seen over the last week, especially on the contentious abortion issue that Joe Biden's been able to push back pretty strongly. And people have been able to call out the different stances between 2016, 2017, and now 2024. So why do you think Donald Trump and his advisors aren't speaking out more on a pro-Israel message?
Yeah, I think they see limited upside from it. Certainly there are some with the Jewish political class and the Jewish donor class, which everybody knows is very active in politics and business at the highest level. That being said, as a voting bloc, they're not very large. I mean, there's 7 to 8 million Jewish Americans, and they're concentrated in California, New York, Massachusetts, Maryland, Illinois. So they're not moving the needle. There is a much larger voter bloc in the swing states that Biden is actively cowing to, that I think Donald Trump, with their antipathy toward Biden right now, is not trying to stand up and say, yeah, you know what, you may not like him, but I'm going to give you a reason not to vote for me either. I think he's just trying to play it up the center and not taking a stand because he's in an election year. And this is a guy who, his stands are the stands that benefit himself, not that benefit, the right policy or philosophical framework. So I think it's just a cynical bargain he's making because it's an election year. Unfortunately to say, it would be a lot better to see him full-throated on this.
Yeah, I mean, much like his stance on abortion this week. But what about evangelicals? And we've only got about 20 seconds because they are a large voting bloc that wants him to be pro-Israel.
Yeah, well, I think that he's had to sort of thread the needle with them over certain issues like abortion. Here he is saying, states' rights issues. He can only run on, I overturned Roe v. Wade so much before, it does get returned to the states. And then most of the states that, were pro-choice are cementing it, and then how do you take that incrementally and say, well, now here's what I can do?
We gotta leave it there, but thanks, Power Panel. We'll be right back with more. Well, the left continues to target Christians and pro-lifers and conservatives, of course, while amplifying the LGBTQ Marxism, whatever left. And this headline coming from the UK Daily Mail: a girl barred from starting Faith Club while classmates are allowed to set up pride group. Football coach fired for praying with players. The Interfaith's prayer club request was rejected by the school that permits other non-religious clubs to meet. And this is in the US, even though this was the UK Daily Mail. So this includes allowing a pride club, which is a safe space for students to build community, quote unquote. The school district is very close to where Coach Joe Kennedy won at the Supreme Court over his unjust firing for leading on-field prayers. So joining me now is Ken Tashjy, who is a campus reform fellow. And Ken, it just seems like this is so clearly against the First Amendment. Why do schools keep doing this?
They just don't learn their lesson. And I might add, not only does this school district or this school have a pride group, LGBT pride group that it recognizes, but it also has a green group, a climate change group that it recognizes. And here you've got an 11-year-old student in the middle school who's asked to have recognition of a group of students of like mind to get together and pray. And she's been denied. And I would think that this is going to very quickly either be resolved or it's going to have to go on the long haul of litigation and ultimately be resolved on behalf of the student, because I would think this is blatant viewpoint discrimination.
It seems like it. And so what was the school's justification for saying, okay, we can have a pride club, we can have, a green group, but the only thing that we're going to discriminate against and say, no, you can't have that as a recognized group is a faith club?
Yeah, there wasn't a great deal of information that was provided on behalf of the institution or the school and its rationale. But in many of these cases, they'll rely on a misinterpretation of, say, the Establishment Clause, that there can't be any connection or affiliation between the state, this being a public school, and religion. And that's just not the case here. If they allow for student groups to use school facilities, and they recognize groups like a pride group or a green group, then they have to similarly recognize, in this case, a group of students wanting to pray together. Otherwise, it's just simply singling this group out because of the viewpoint and the speech that they're going to be engaged in, which is praying, and that's illegal.
Yeah, and that seems so often to be the low IQ leftist rejoinder to these types of clear viewpoint discrimination, to say, oh well, separation of church and state, and so because this is a public school, then clearly you can't have any religion, and that's just a non-starter. And so let's debunk that myth, because that is not at all what the Establishment Clause stands for. And I think, of course, separation of church and state, in terms of the litany of case law on that, was was wrong at its inception, and we've had some clarification in the Coach Kennedy case of the lemon test that has now been basically debunked and fallen out of favor. But why is separation of church and state continuing to be this leftist mantra when that's clearly not what the Constitution says?
Well, I think they use it as a hammer, and they use it as a hammer because so many of these faith groups, or a coach praying with his players, or a 11-year-old who wants to have a prayer group in school, they're engaging in speech that is contrary to the dogma of the diversity, equity, and inclusion crowd. And you see it both in elementary, secondary, and higher education, that there is an asserted effort to eliminate or to target faith-based groups, particularly now on college campuses, because they engage in speech about their beliefs and their values and their ideals that are absolutely counter to the DEI dogma.
And so you're with Campus Reform, and you've seen this happen over and over again, as you're describing, and this is just the latest instance. And so for parents of kids who are going to public school, whether whatever the rationale is and whatever their choice to send their faith-based students to public schools, how can they potentially get ahead of this and not be in the situation that this fifth grader is, where they're asking for this group and then they're denied, and then they're faced with potentially the prospect of extended litigation?
Yeah, unfortunately, it often has to take the route of litigation, because these schools, these administrators dig in their heels. They are fully committed to the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda. And any organization or speech or activity that seems to run counter to or in conflict with that agenda, they seek to repress or eliminate from their schools or their campuses. So ultimately, there really is a need to have to litigate these matters. And we've seen that most recently. We've seen Liberty Counsel, a nonprofit legal firm, represent a number of plaintiffs in these type of cases. First Liberty Institute as well, the Beckett Law Group. So there are nonprofits out there that will assist parents and students when they're confronted with this type of discriminatory treatment over their faith beliefs.
Yeah, and it's so important to have these types of nonprofits, because I think the schools are counting on the parents not having the resources to fight this, or just saying, well, we don't have the time and the effort to do this, and so ultimately backing down. And that's why it is really important to have these kinds of pro First Amendment, pro freedom, pro liberty organizations, including the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Thomas More Society, and others. I think we need even more attorneys that are willing to dedicate time to these types of organizations. But for parents who may find themselves in this situation, then what would Campus Reform's advice be in terms of how to navigate these types of situations when they encounter them? Even ahead of litigation? I mean, is there a best practice in terms of appealing to the administration with some of this stuff up front?
Sure. I mean, look, I think most folks in this circumstance are just looking to be treated fairly. And that really is the standard. We're looking for fundamental fairness, that if you're going to allow certain student groups to exist on a high school campus or an elementary school campus or a college campus, that it should be universally and equitably applied. And if you can call to the attention of the administrators the inequity of the application of their own policies, hopefully that will have some impact or effect on their ongoing handling those type of situations. And you have to work your way up the chain of command. Ultimately, you may end up with the conversation with the principal or the president or board members as well. But again, it's a tough road to hoe these days, because there is such a commitment, both intellectually and financially, in diversity, equity, and inclusion on our campuses. And it is so entrenched that ultimately, unfortunately, litigation is usually the only recourse to address these kind of violations.
Well, I'm so thankful for the work that you and Campus Reform are doing. And also, as you mentioned, all of these other nonprofit organizations that provide resources for litigation. And it is so frustrating that these administrators are so committed to these ridiculous ideas and committed to viewpoint discrimination that there's not really a lot of arguing with them. But we hope that this young lady prevails with her faith group. But Ken, thanks so much. And we'll be right back with more with our Thursday Roundup and the Power Panel. All right, we are back with our power panel for the last topic on Thursday's Roundup. And we have Robin Biro, a Democrat strategist, Matt Tyrmand, a Claremont Institute fellow, and John Cardillo, who's former NYPD and a GOP strategist. I wish they would listen to you more, John. If you are a GOP strategist, they need to actually listen to some of us who have good strategizing. But all right, but they really don't, and that's the sad truth. But this headline coming from the Daily Wire: House blocks FISA spy bill, opponents demand warrant requirement. On Wednesday, the GOP-led House blocked the advancement of a bill that sought to reauthorize Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, for 5 years and implement reforms on the controversial spy tool. The vote tanked a rule to bring the legislation up for consideration, creating a major setback for House Speaker Mike Johnson, who vouched for the bill after former President Donald Trump urged lawmakers to reject the spy program used to monitor non-U.S. citizens abroad. 19 Republicans joined with all voting Democrats to oppose moving forward. The final tally was 193 to 228. 10 members, including 6 Republicans and 4 Democrats, did not vote. What leadership will do next is not immediately clear, but it is possible lawmakers will go for another extension with no reforms. They have until April 19th, so early next week, to reauthorize Section 702 before it sunsets. So, Robin, let's talk first about FISA. This has been a really controversial hot topic. I was surprised to see Speaker Johnson actually move this forward and call for an affirmative vote on this.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So, I mean, compare his leadership to Speaker Pelosi, at least in terms of being able to, whip the coalition.
Yeah, you just took the words right out of my mouth. I've been a vocal critic of Nancy Pelosi for as long as I've known about Nancy Pelosi. But look, she at least had the ability to count the votes before she called for the votes. And I'm just shocked that he had 19 Republicans, that he had to have known that they weren't going to vote for this. The only thing I can think of strategically is that if there were to be a problem, some terror attack or a cyber terror attack, that he could at least say it's on them. But my gosh, don't call for the vote if you don't have the votes. It's just a rookie mistake, Jenna.
Yeah, and it seems like he should know better than that. I mean, he's not a freshman member of Congress, but John, let's talk about FISA itself. There obviously need to be reforms, and I think Republicans were right to criticize the speaker, including Donald Trump. And his Truth Social post was, "They were spying on me," and so of course it's all about him. But he's right in this instance that reforms need to be made. So why the Democrats that are also voting this down? Was that just a shot at Mike Johnson?
Well, look, we know Democrats love big government and they love to weaponize government. So an enhanced FISA, FISA in and of itself, the mere existence of FISA helps Democrats. But I think this is the wrong vote. I think Republicans should be voting to gut FISA and rewrite it with incredibly strict parameters. Because in practical terms, here's the problem with FISA, Jenna. It's supposed to be to surveil a foreign agent, a foreign individual, right? A foreign person of interest, whether that be a money launderer, a cartel member, a terrorist. But here's where the abuse really happens. Now, we know we've got these judges. You know better than anybody that we have these judges who rubber stamp things and give blank checks to the federal government, to the Bureau, to the agency, to the DOJ. Here's the problem. There's a foreign corporation doing business with an American citizen. That American citizen has the wrong politics. They've done nothing wrong their entire lives. They're law-abiding. 12 years ago, in that foreign corporation, somebody took a bribe. You can get a FISA warrant on every phone in that corporation if your end game result, if you're trying to end run and surveil that American because of their politics. And this is the abuse that's been happening. So Republicans shouldn't be voting on whether or not to slightly reform FISA or enhance FISA. They should be voting on gutting FISA, eradicating it, and rebuilding it. Now, you do need it, right? We need to surveil cartel members and we need to surveil terrorists. And so we do need that. And we need to look at American persons of interest when they are truly involved. But what it's become is fishing with hand grenades, where they're dropping them in the water against anybody they perceive as even an ideological enemy and using and abusing FISA to destroy their lives. So I think Republicans are horribly misguided on this entire issue and need to go back to square one.
Well, that sounds like Republicans on a lot of issues, Matt, that they just seem to be very unprepared. And so, to John's point, I mean, that would be a much better use of this type of legislation. So why aren't Republicans actually pushing to gut FISA, rewrite it, and actually do what it is supposed to do, rather than, just kind of this sort of feckless vote?
Well, Republicans believe that we are in a parliamentary system and that there are 20 parties and that, the strongest faction in any one moment can move things forward. And Dems know that we are in a two-party system and the only way to win is to become monolithic when push comes to shove. So we have the House Freedom Caucus, and Mike Johnson was in the House Freedom Caucus. I don't think he's a particularly large fan of FISA. The Freedom Caucus has been all about limited government, libertarian ideals in legislative politics since it was founded, 7, 8 to 9 years ago. But the FISA bill, I think he brings it because he knows it's going to fail. So there's something where Robin hit upon something that I think is correct. He only has a 1-vote majority. You've got 42 to 49 members in the Freedom Caucus. So this thing is not going to pass, but you bring it so you can at least talk to, as Speaker now, he has to deal with the executive branch. He has to deal with the intel apparatus. He's got a Secret Service security detail. He gets his own briefings, especially from committee heads. So he can say, okay, well, I brought it, but now we can go back and figure out the best way to move it forward. Nobody on the right is a fan of this because, as Cardillo astutely and correctly pointed out, if you've watched any modern history, it is weaponized against everybody who says, maybe we're not fans of what the government is doing right now. Okay, then you get an investigation and they sort of bring you up on nonsense about foreign ties because you went to Italy for your honeymoon. So the whole thing is run amok. There's definitely a Reagan witticism that applies here about government growth, that it's grown out of control. And even if it had the best intentions when it was founded for intel purposes, it is now another tool of out of control technocracy and bureaucracy. So hopefully they will scale it back markedly so they can go back to its original intent.
Well, so it seems like, that's a reasonable explanation, and Mike Johnson and maybe his team should have had better messaging, especially even behind the scenes to somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who wants to oust him as chair for this and also the Ukraine reauthorization. And so, it seems like if we're trying to play 4D chess, to put it in, Trump terms, then maybe we should be doing that a little bit better. And for the Republican-controlled media, they're not really using that well and not nearly as effectively as the Democrats. But gentlemen, we're already out of time. So appreciate you all, and thanks so much for joining. That's all the time that we have for Jenna Ellis tonight. I will see you tomorrow on Friday.